My wife told me she was driving 3 hours north to visit her sister. She kissed me goodbye at 9:30 that morning, promised she'd call before bed. At 7:18 p.m., my phone buzzed. It wasn't her, it was her boss. A single photo, a hotel receipt, 2 names, 1 room. My heart stopped when I read the message under it. I think you deserve to see this. I stared at the screen longer than I cared to admit. The receipt was clear, sharp, impossible to misunderstand. A downtown hotel I recognized instantly, not near her sister's place, not even the same direction. The date was today. The timestamp said 6:42 p.m. The room was booked for 2 nights. Under the guest name was my wife's full legal name, the one she only used on official documents. Under it, in smaller print, was her boss's name. I remember whispering, "No," like that alone could undo what I was seeing. I called her immediately, straight to voicemail. I tried again, same thing. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Some mistake, a work emergency. Anything. My wife and I had been married for 32 years, we raised 2 kids. Buried parents. Paid off a mortgage. You don't just erase that with a hotel receipt. My phone buzzed again. Another message from her boss. No apology. Just, "She said you thought she was with her sister." That sentence hit harder than the receipt itself. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one we refinished together after the kids moved out. My hands were shaking. I thought back to that morning, how calm she was, how normal. She'd complained about traffic, asked if I wanted chicken or beef for dinner tomorrow. There was no guilt in her voice, no hesitation. That scared me more than anything. I typed back, asking why he was sending this to me. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally he replied, "Because I found something out today, and so did you." I didn't know what he meant, and I didn't like the way it sounded. I asked what hotel it was. He said, "You should drive there." I told him I wasn't interested in confronting anyone in a lobby like some fool. That's when he sent the last message of the night. Then check the credit card statement. She used the joint one. I didn't know. That was it. No more texts. Just silence. I sat there until the kitchen clock clicked over to 8. I logged into our bank account with fingers that felt too big for the keyboard. There it was, pending charge. Same hotel. Same amount. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. I thought about calling my son, but what would I say? Your mother might be cheating on me. I thought about calling her sister, but I didn't want to involve anyone until I knew for sure. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and waited. I don't know why. Hope, maybe, or fear of what came next. At 10:14 p.m., my wife finally called. She sounded tired, not surprised, not panicked, just tired. "Hey," she said, like this was any other night. I asked her where she was. She paused for half a second too long. "At Linda's," she said. I asked her to put Linda on the phone. Another pause. Then, "She's asleep." That was when something in me hardened. I told her I had the receipt. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just said it. She went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller. "Who sent it?" she asked. That question told me everything. Not denial. Not confusion. Just concern about who knew. I told her her boss did. She inhaled sharply. I could hear traffic in the background. Not rural night sounds. City noise. I asked her to tell me the truth. She said, "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. 32 years, and that was the line she chose. I asked her where she really was. She said, "We'll talk when I get back." I told her not to bother coming home tonight. She didn't argue. That hurt more than if she had. She just said, "Okay." Then she added, "Please don't do anything until we talk." I asked her what that meant. She said, "Just, please." And then she hung up. I sat there in the quiet house, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, wondering how long my life had been splitting in two without me noticing. What I didn't know then was that the hotel receipt wasn't the worst thing I was going to learn. Not even close. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my side of the bed staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly. The same one I installed 15 years ago when we remodeled the bedroom. Every creak of the house felt louder than usual. Around midnight, I got up and walked through the rooms, not because I needed anything, but because standing still felt impossible. Her shoes were still by the door. Her mug was in the sink. Normal things, that was the worst part. Everything looked the same, while something fundamental had cracked open inside me. At around 3:30 a.m., I checked my phone again. No new messages. I opened our photo gallery, something I hadn't done in years, and scrolled back through pictures of us. Anniversaries, weddings, birthdays, hospital rooms. Smiles that looked real. I tried to pinpoint when those smiles might have started lying to me. Was it months ago? Years? Or was this something sudden, reckless, and stupid? I kept replaying her voice from the call. Calm, controlled. Not caught, just inconvenienced. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her with anger. I needed information. Real information. At 7:15 a.m., I logged into our phone account and pulled call logs. I felt guilty doing it, like I was crossing some line, but that guilt evaporated when I saw the pattern. Her boss's number appeared again and again. Late nights, early mornings, weekends. Not constant, but consistent. Enough to tell a story, enough to tell me. This wasn't a one-time mistake. At 8 a.m., my phone rang. It was her sister, Linda. I answered, my heart already racing. She sounded confused. "Did something happen?" she asked. "Your wife never showed up yesterday." I closed my eyes. That single sentence crushed the last bit of denial I'd been clinging to. I thanked Linda and told her we'd talk later. When I hung up, I sat down hard on the couch. She hadn't just lied to me. She'd used her sister as cover. That meant planning. That meant intent. Around noon, her boss called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He sounded nervous now, not confident like before. He said he wanted to explain. I told him to talk. He said it wasn't supposed to go this far, that it started as work stress, late meetings, shared drinks. He said he thought we were separated. That's when I interrupted him. I told him we were very much married, and unless he had something useful to say, this conversation was over. He paused, then said, "She told me something last night, something I didn't know." I asked, "What?" He said, "She said you'd never forgive her if you knew the truth." That sentence sat heavy between us. I asked him if there was more than an affair. He didn't answer directly. He just said, "Check the storage unit." I asked him, "What storage unit?" He said, "She'll know." Then he hung up. I stared at my phone, stunned. Storage unit? We didn't have a storage unit. Or at least I didn't think we did. I called her again, straight to voicemail. This time, I left a message. I told her I'd spoken to Linda. I told her I knew she hadn't been there. I told her she had one chance to tell me everything. An hour later, she called back. She sounded shaken now, not tired, shaken. I asked her about the storage unit. She went quiet. I asked again. Finally, she said, "I didn't want you to find out like this." I asked what this was. She said, "Everything collapsing." I told her it already had. I asked her what was in the unit. She said, "Things from before." Before what? Before us. She didn't answer. I asked her where the unit was. She said she'd take me there when she got back. That wasn't good enough. I told her I was done waiting. I told her to give me the address. She started crying then, real crying, not the controlled voice from last night. She said she was afraid. I asked of what. She said, "Of losing you." I almost believed her. Almost then I remembered the receipt. The lies. Linda's call. I told her fear doesn't excuse deception. Eventually she gave me the address. A facility 20 minutes from our house. I hung up and grabbed my keys. The storage facility was quiet when I arrived. Rows of metal doors, numbers stenciled in black. I found the unit she'd given me. I stood there for a long moment before unlocking it, my hand resting on the cold metal latch. Part of me hoped it would be empty, that she'd panicked and made something up. But when I rolled the door up, I knew that hope was useless. Inside were boxes, neatly stacked, labeled, some with dates going back decades, and on top of one box facing outward was a framed photograph. It was of her, younger, much younger, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. Her hand was on his arm, intimate, familiar. My stomach dropped. I picked up the photo and turned it over. Written in her handwriting were the words, "The life I almost had." I felt dizzy. Almost had, what did that mean? I set the photo down and opened the nearest box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, addressed to her. Some opened, some still sealed, all from the same man. I didn't read them yet. I couldn't. I felt like if I did, something irreversible would happen. I closed the box and stepped back, breathing hard. This wasn't just an affair. This was a history, a hidden one she'd carried into our marriage, or maybe built alongside it. I locked the unit back up and leaned against my car, trying to steady myself. My phone buzzed, a text from her. "Please don't judge me until you know everything." I stared at the screen and realized the truth was no longer about her. It was about me, and what I was willing to accept once I knew it. I sat in my car for a long time, after locking the storage unit, longer than made sense. My hands were still on the steering wheel, but I wasn't ready to drive. My mind kept circling back to that photo. The life I almost had. Those words felt deliberate, not sentimental. Hainai. Like a confession she never planned to make. I kept thinking about our early years, how she used to say fate brought us together, how lucky we were. Now I wondered if fate had been something she settled for. I drove home slowly, every red light stretching out like it was daring me to think harder. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed her car wasn't there yet. That gave me a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because I wasn't ready to see her face. Dread because I knew that moment was coming, whether I wanted it or not. Inside the house, everything was quiet. I made coffee. I didn't drink, and sat at the table again, staring at nothing. Around 4:40 p.m., her car finally pulled in. I watched from the living room window as she sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, head bowed. That image would have broken my heart yesterday. Today it just made me tired. When she came inside, she didn't take her shoes off. She stood by the door like a guest. I asked her if she'd eaten. She shook her head. I told her to sit down. She did, for a few seconds. Neither of us spoke. Then she said my name, softly, like she was afraid it might shatter. I told her to start at the beginning. Not the affair, not the hotel, the real beginning. She swallowed hard and told me about a man she dated in her 20s. A serious relationship, plans to move away together. She said he disappeared suddenly. No goodbye, no explanation. She said she found out months later he'd been married the entire time. I asked her what that had to do with the boxes. She hesitated. Then she said, "He didn't disappear." I felt a chill run through me. She told me he came back years later. Apologetic, broken, divorced. She said they exchanged letters for years. Not physical, just words. She said she never met him again after marrying me. I asked her if that was true. She nodded too quickly. I asked her if the man in the photo was him. She said, yes. I asked her why she kept everything. The letters, the photo, the storage unit. She said it was part of who she was before me, that it reminded her she was wanted once, that hurt more than I expected. I asked her if I didn't want her. She said that wasn't what she meant. I asked her why her boss was involved. She went quiet again. Then she said something I wasn't ready for. She said the man from the letters died last year. She said his death brought everything back. Old feelings, regrets. She said she started confiding in her boss because he reminded her of him. That's when I stood up. I told her to stop. I told her grief doesn't give permission to betray. She started crying again, saying she didn't plan for it to go that far. I asked her if she loved her boss. She said no. I asked if she loved me. She didn't answer right away. That pause felt like a lifetime. Then she said, I don't want to lose you. I asked her again, more quietly, if she loved me. She said yes, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. I told her about the call logs, about Linda, about the lies stacking up. She said she panicked, that she didn't know how to stop. Once she started lying, I told her panic doesn't last months. Then I asked her the question that had been burning since the storage unit. I asked her why the photo said the life I almost had. She wiped her eyes and said, because she wondered sometimes who she would have been if things had gone differently. I asked her if she wondered that while lying next to me, she didn't respond. That was answer enough. That night I slept on the couch, not out of spite, out of necessity. I needed space to breathe, to think without her voice shaping my thoughts. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of her crying in the bedroom. I didn't go to her. That was the first time in our marriage. I made that choice. It felt cruel. It also felt honest. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not because I wanted a divorce immediately, but because I needed clarity. The lawyer listened quietly, asked a few pointed questions, and then said something that stuck with me. He said, the affair matters, but the secrecy matters more. I thanked him and hung up. When I went back inside, my wife was sitting at the table, eyes swollen, holding one of the old letters from the storage unit. She looked up at me and said she wanted to be honest now, fully honest. I told her she should have wanted that before. She nodded and said she had something else to tell me. My stomach tightened, she said. The storage unit wasn't just about the past. She said there were documents in there, financial documents. I asked what kind. She said accounts I didn't know about. Money she'd inherited quietly years ago, and never told me about. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. 32 years of shared life, and she'd hidden money. I asked her why. She said she was afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of depending on anyone completely. I realized then that the affair wasn't the deepest betrayal. The deepest betrayal was that she'd never fully trusted me. Not with her heart. Not with her past. Not with her future. I told her I needed time. Real time. Not days. Not weeks. She asked if that meant separation. I said it meant I didn't know yet. That uncertainty scared her more than any answer. As I walked out of the room, I felt something shift inside me. The man who'd been blindsided by a hotel receipt was gone. In his place was someone more cautious, more aware, and slowly, painfully, more prepared for what might come next. I didn't leave the house that day, even though I'd told her I needed space. I stayed because I wanted to see how she moved, now that the truth had started leaking out. There's something revealing about the quiet moments after a confession. The way someone pours coffee, the way they avoid your eyes, the way they hesitate before speaking, like every word might make things worse. She moved carefully, like the house was made of glass. I watched all of it, and with every passing hour, I realized how little I actually knew about the woman I'd shared a life with. Around mid-morning, she asked if I wanted breakfast. I said no. It wasn't anger. I just didn't want anything from her hands yet. She sat across from me at the table anyway, fingers wrapped around her mug, staring into it like it might give her answers. After a while, she said my name again. I didn't respond. Finally, she said, I'll answer anything, I promise. That word promise landed wrong. I looked up and asked her why promises mattered now. She flinched, but she didn't argue. She nodded and said she understood. I asked her about the money, all of it, when it started, how much there was, where it came from. She took a deep breath and told me her aunt had left it to her years ago. Not a fortune, but enough to matter. She said she never told me because she wanted something that was just hers. I asked her if she'd ever used it. She said yes. That stopped me. I asked her when. She said she'd used some of it recently. I felt my jaw tighten. I asked her what she used it for. She hesitated, then said she'd paid off a personal loan. I asked, "What loan?" She looked down and said it was money she'd borrowed to help someone. I asked, "Who?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, she said his name. Her boss's name. The room felt smaller. I asked her why she'd loan him money. She said he was in trouble. Divorce. Legal fees. She said she felt sorry for him. I asked her if she'd felt sorry enough to lie to me. She didn't deny it. I asked her if the hotel was paid with that money too. She shook her head and said no. That part was supposed to be a business expense. That made me laugh. A short, bitter sound I didn't recognize as my own. I asked her if she could hear herself. She started crying again, but I didn't stop her this time. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until she had to sit with it. Then I asked her the question I'd been avoiding. I asked her if she planned to leave me. She looked up quickly and said no, too quickly. I asked her if she'd thought about it. She hesitated, and that hesitation said more than words ever could. She admitted she'd wondered what her life would look like if she were alone, if she didn't have to explain herself to anyone. That confession hurt in a quiet way, like a slow leak. I asked her if she'd wondered that before or after the affair started. She said before, long before. That's when something clicked. This wasn't about her boss. He was just a symptom. This was about a restlessness she'd never shared with me, a dissatisfaction she'd hidden behind routine and responsibility. I told her that. She didn't argue. She said she didn't want to hurt me. I told her intent doesn't erase impact. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and said she knew that now. In the afternoon, I left the house for the first time since she came back. I drove without a destination, just letting the road stretch out in front of me. I thought about our kids, about what I'd tell them if this went further, about whether I even owed them an explanation. I thought about the lawyer's words, about secrecy being the real poison, and I thought about myself, about how much of my identity was tied to being her husband. That realization scared me more than the idea of being alone. When I came back, she was in the living room, sorting through a stack of papers from the storage unit. She looked up like she wasn't sure if I'd return. I asked her what she was doing. She said she was putting everything on the table. No more hiding. I sat down and told her to keep going. She handed me documents I'd never seen before. Account statements, old correspondence, even a draft of a letter she'd written years ago but never sent, addressed to the man from the photo. I didn't read it all. I didn't need to. Just knowing it existed was enough. I asked her why she'd kept it. She said, because she never felt like she got closure. I asked her if she thought cheating was closure. That question made her cry harder than anything else I'd said. She said no. She said she knew she'd made a mess of everything. I told her, acknowledging that didn't fix it. That evening we talked logistics. Not emotions. Logistics. Separate bank accounts for now. Transparency with finances. Counseling, if we continued. Space. Boundaries. It felt strange, negotiating the terms of a marriage that had once felt automatic. She agreed to everything without argument. That compliance worried me. It felt less like commitment and more like fear of consequences. Before bed, she asked if I was going to stay in the house. I said yes. For now. I said yes. For now. She nodded and said she'd take the guest room. When she walked away, she paused and said, I never meant to make you feel like an option. I didn't respond, because the truth was, intention didn't matter anymore. Impact did. I lay awake that night, thinking about choice, about how many small choices lead to one big disaster, about how trust doesn't break all at once, but cracks slowly, quietly, until one day you realize it's gone. Somewhere around 3 a.m. My phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Just a single sentence. She didn't tell you everything. No name, no explanation. Just that. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I didn't wake her. I didn't reply. I just lay there, listening to the house breathe, realizing that the truth I thought I was uncovering might only be the surface. And whatever was still hidden had enough power to reach out to me in the middle of the night. I didn't sleep after that message. I kept replaying it in my head, the simplicity of it, the certainty. She didn't tell you everything. No accusation, no drama. Just a statement. Those are always the most dangerous. I waited until morning before doing anything. Not because I was calm, but because I didn't trust myself, not to react instead of think. When the sun finally came up, I felt like I'd already lived a full day. She was already awake when I came into the kitchen. Sitting at the table again. Same spot, same mug. She looked at me like she'd been waiting for something. I poured myself coffee and sat across from her. For a moment I considered saying nothing, pretending I hadn't received the message, but I was done carrying secrets for her. I asked her if there was anything else she hadn't told me. Her eyes flicked up, startled. She said no, too quickly. Again, I slid my phone across the table and told her to read the message. She picked it up, read it once, then again. I watched her face closely. Not anger, not confusion, fear, real fear. She asked who sent it. I said I didn't know. She shook her head slowly and said, "It had to be him." I asked who him was. She hesitated, then said her boss. I asked her why he'd send something like that. She said because he was angry now, because she'd told him she was done. That explanation didn't sit right. I asked her what else she hadn't told me. She insisted there was nothing. I asked her to swear to me. She said, "I am," but her voice cracked on the last word. I told her I'd spoken to a lawyer. That got her attention. She asked what he'd said. I told her, he said. Transparency was the only thing that could save anything at this point. I told her if I found out later that she'd lied again, there would be no discussion, no counseling, no second chances. She started crying quietly, the kind of crying that feels more like resignation than remorse. Then she said there was something. Just one more thing. I told her to talk. She said the money she'd hidden wasn't just inheritance. Some of it was, but not all. I felt my chest tighten. I asked her where the rest came from. She said it came from a settlement, years ago. Before we moved into this house, I asked what kind of settlement. She whispered, "A workplace claim." I asked her to explain. She told me about a job she'd had early in our marriage, a supervisor who crossed lines. Comments, touching, pressure. She said she'd reported it, that the company settled quietly. She said she was ashamed of what happened, ashamed of taking the money, ashamed of not telling me. I sat there trying to process that. Part of me felt angry she'd kept it from me. Another part felt sick thinking about what she'd gone through alone. I asked her why she didn't tell me then. She said she didn't want to be seen as weak. She didn't want to be pitied. She wanted to move on and pretend it never happened. I asked her if that experience had anything to do with her boss now. She shook her head, then hesitated, then nodded. She said she thought she was stronger now, that she could control things, that she could say no. I asked her if she had. She didn't answer. That silence told me enough. I asked her if her boss knew about the settlement. She said no. I asked her if he knew about the letters, the man from before. She said yes. I asked her if he'd used that knowledge. She said she didn't think so. I asked her if she was sure. She wasn't. That's when I understood the message from the unknown number wasn't about revenge. It was about leverage. I asked her if she'd ever felt pressured to keep seeing him. She hesitated again. Then she said sometimes that he'd remind her how vulnerable she'd been before, how easily things could spiral if people found out. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly across the floor. I asked her why she hadn't told me that part. She said she was afraid I'd blame her. I told her the only thing I blamed her for was not trusting me enough to stand with her. That afternoon, we went through everything together. Every document, every account, every message she still had. I wanted no shadows left. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, but necessary. By the end of it, I understood something important. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been living in fear for a long time. Fear doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains how she got there. And fear has a way of pulling everyone down with it. In the early evening, her phone rang. It was him. She looked at me. Unsure, I told her to answer it. Put it on speaker. She did. His voice was sharp, controlled. He asked if she'd told me. She said yes. He laughed softly and said it didn't matter anymore. He said he'd already spoken to someone. I asked who. There was a pause. Then he said a lawyer. Not a threat. Just information. I asked him what he wanted. He said he wanted distance. He said he was stepping down from his position. That surprised both of us. He said he didn't want this to get uglier. I told him it already was. He said you don't know the half of it. Then he hung up. The room felt heavy after that. Like something had shifted again. Later that night, my wife asked me if I hated her. I told her no. Hate takes energy. I told her I was disappointed, hurt, tired. She nodded like she understood. She asked if there was any chance. I told her I didn't know. And that was the truth. I went to bed with that uncertainty sitting on my chest. And around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. This time it was longer. He's not stepping down voluntarily. Check the board minutes from last quarter. Attached was a photo, a screenshot of a document. My wife leaned over to read it, her face drained of color. She whispered, "I never saw this." And in that moment I realized the story was bigger than our marriage, bigger than an affair. And whatever was coming next wasn't just going to test our relationship. It was going to test everything we thought we knew about power, truth, and who was really in control. I read the document 3 times before it started to make sense. It was a set of board meeting minutes from my wife's company, dated 6 months back. Most of it was corporate language I barely understood, but one paragraph was highlighted. It mentioned an internal investigation, a pending resignation, and a confidentiality clause tied to a senior executive. That executive was her boss. My wife kept saying, "I never saw this," like repeating it might make it true. I believed her. The fear in her voice wasn't performance. It was realization. I asked her why this mattered. She said because the investigation wasn't about finances or restructuring. It was about misconduct, multiple complaints, quiet settlements. She said she'd heard rumors but never connected them to him directly. I asked her if she was one of those complaints. She shook her head quickly and said no. Then she stopped and said, "Not officially." That distinction chilled me. I asked what she meant. She said she'd gone to HR once months ago, but withdrew before filing anything formal. I asked her why. She said, because he'd reminded her of the past. The settlement, the way companies protect themselves, not people. She said he told her she'd be dragged through it all again, that her reputation would suffer, that it would be easier to keep things quiet. I felt something dark settle in my chest. This wasn't just infidelity. This was manipulation, control. I asked her if that was why she felt trapped. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her face. I told her to sit down and listen carefully. I told her that whatever happened next, she wasn't handling it alone anymore. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because no one deserves to be cornered like that. She looked at me with a mix of relief and guilt that hurt to see. I asked her if she still had messages from him. She said yes. I asked her to forward everything to me. She hesitated, then did it. Reading those messages was like peeling back layers of something rotten. Nothing explicit at first glance, just pressure disguised as concern. Don't rock the boat. Think about your future. We can protect each other. But once you knew what to look for, the meaning was clear. He'd been tightening a leash slowly, counting on her fear to keep her quiet. I felt anger rise, sharp and focused. Not the blind rage I'd felt at the hotel receipt, but something colder. That night, I called the lawyer again. I told him everything about the affair. The settlement, the messages, the board document. He was quiet for a long time, then said this crossed into something serious. He said, my wife needed her own attorney, separate from anything we decided about our marriage. He said there were protections now that hadn't existed years ago. Whistleblower laws, documentation. I looked at my wife while he spoke. She looked terrified. I told him we'd call back tomorrow. After I hung up, she asked me if I was doing this to punish her. That question stung. I told her no. I told her I was doing it because letting people like her boss win by silence was how this kept happening. I told her that whatever happened between us, she deserved the truth to be told. She covered her face and cried harder than I'd ever seen, not out of shame this time, but out of release. Like something she'd been carrying finally had somewhere to go. The next day was a blur of phone calls. Attorneys, HR representatives, an independent investigator. Everything moved faster than I expected. That alone told me how much the company already knew. My wife gave a formal statement. I sat with her through it, even when it hurt to hear parts of the story that overlapped with her betrayal of me. I reminded myself that two truths could exist at once. She could have wronged me and still been wronged herself. By late afternoon, her boss was placed on administrative leave, not stepping down. Forced out, the unknown number texted again. You did the right thing, I replied, for the first time asking who they were. The response came quickly. Someone who stayed quiet too long. That was all. I didn't push further. I understood enough. Silence had victims on both sides of it. That evening, my wife and I sat on opposite ends of the couch, exhausted, drained. She asked me what this meant for us. I told her honestly that I still didn't know, that trust doesn't come back just because the villain changes. She nodded. She said she'd accept whatever decision I made. I told her I didn't want acceptance. I wanted accountability, real change, therapy, transparency. No more compartments. She agreed without hesitation. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat alone and thought about how close I'd come to walking away without knowing the full story. How easy it would have been to reduce everything to a simple narrative. Cheating wife, betrayed husband. Clean break. But life rarely offers clean lines. Sometimes the truth is tangled, uncomfortable, and forces you to hold more than one emotion at once. Just before midnight, my phone rang. A number I recognized now. The lawyer, he said the company wanted to settle quickly. Confidentiality agreements, compensation, public silence. I asked him what he thought. He said it was my wife's choice, but he also said something else. He said, sometimes the biggest revenge is refusing to disappear. I thanked him and hung up. I went into the bedroom and watched my wife sleep for a moment. She looked older than she had a week ago. So did I. I realized that whatever happened next, our marriage wouldn't go back to what it was. That version of us was gone. But something else might be possible. Something more honest. Or nothing at all. Both outcomes were real, and for the first time since this began, I felt steady enough to face either one. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed one last time. A news alert. Senior executive placed on leave amid expanding internal investigation. No names yet. But they would come. And when they did, the story would finally be out in the open. The question that remained wasn't what would happen to him. It was what would happen to us once the dust settled. The next morning felt unnaturally quiet, like the calm after a storm that hadn't fully passed. My wife was already dressed when I came into the kitchen, sitting straight-backed at the table, hands folded like she was waiting for a verdict. There was coffee for me this time, poured but untouched. I noticed that. I sat down across from her, and neither of us spoke for a long moment. We'd talked so much in the last few days that silence now felt heavier than words. She finally broke it by asking if I'd slept. I told her not much. She nodded like she expected that. Then she asked if I'd made a decision. I told her no, not yet. That answer seemed to deflate her more than a harsh one would have. She said she understood and asked if there was anything she could do. I told her there was. I told her she needed to stop thinking in terms of saving the marriage and start thinking in terms of telling the truth, even when it made her uncomfortable. Later that morning her attorney called. They wanted her to come in and discuss options. Settlement versus escalation. Silence versus testimony. I sat with her during the call, not as her husband, but as a witness to what this had become. When she hung up, she looked at me and said she didn't want hush money. That surprised me. I asked why. She said she was tired of being quiet. Tired of carrying things alone. Tired of feeling like her life was always being negotiated behind closed doors. That was the first time in days I felt a flicker of something like respect again. Not forgiveness. Respect. I told her that if she chose that path, it would get ugly before it got better. Public scrutiny. Questions. People digging into her past, including the affair. She said she knew. She said she deserved whatever came with it. That word deserved made my stomach twist. I told her accountability wasn't about punishment, it was about ownership. In the afternoon our son called. I hadn't told him anything yet, but news travels faster than truth. He asked if everything was okay. I told him no. I told him his mother was dealing with something serious at work. I didn't mention the affair, not yet. He was quiet for a moment, then said he was proud of her for standing up. That comment hit both of us hard. After I hung up, my wife started crying again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was grief for the damage she'd caused to the image her children had of her. That evening we went for a walk. Not to reconnect, just to move, side by side. Not touching. Neighbors waved. Normal life carried on around us. Oblivious. At one point she said she wished she could go back to before the hotel, before the lies. I told her going back wasn't an option, only forward, and forward meant facing what we'd both been avoiding for years. She nodded and said she knew. When we got home, there was an envelope taped to the door. No return address. Inside was a printed email chain. Dozens of messages between her boss and members of the board. Discussions about risk, about optics, about which complaints could be managed. My wife's name appeared more than once, not as a problem, as a liability. My hands shook as I read it. She looked over my shoulder and whispered. They knew. That realization broke something in her that hadn't broken yet. We contacted her lawyer immediately. He told us to preserve everything, not to speak to anyone without counsel. He said this was bigger now. That word again, bigger. I was starting to hate it. Bigger meant less control. Bigger meant more eyes. Bigger meant our private pain becoming public property. After the call, my wife asked me if I regretted not leaving when I first saw the receipt. I told her honestly that I didn't know. If I'd left then I'd have protected myself. But I'd also walked away from the full truth. That night, she told me something she hadn't told anyone. Not the lawyer. Not HR. Not even herself. Until now. She said part of why she kept secrets was because she'd spent her whole life being the responsible one. The calm one. the one who didn't make waves. She said she didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like she was failing. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I told her that secrecy isn't strength, it's isolation. Before bed, she asked if I could ever see her differently again. Not as the woman who betrayed me, but as someone flawed and trying to do better. I told her that seeing her clearly was exactly the problem. Love doesn't survive illusions. It survives truth. Whether ours would survive this truth was still an open question. She accepted that, quietly. At around 1 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Not a text. An email from the company's legal department. They wanted a meeting, both of us, together. My wife looked at me, eyes wide. I told her we'd go, not because we owed them anything, but because I wanted to see their faces when they realized silence was no longer on the table. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about how quickly roles change. A week ago, I was a husband, blindsided by betrayal. Now I was standing at the edge of something that felt like a reckoning, not just for one man or one company, but for a pattern that thrived on people being too afraid to speak. And in the middle of it all was my marriage, fragile and unresolved, waiting to see whether truth would tear it apart or give it a chance to be rebuilt on something real. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Downtown in a glass building, I'd driven past 100 times, without ever thinking I'd sit inside it. We arrived early. My wife sat rigid in her chair in the lobby, hands folded again, the same way she'd been sitting at our kitchen table all week. I could tell she was bracing herself. Not just for the company, but for what might come out of her own mouth once the questions started. I told her quietly that she didn't have to protect anyone anymore. She nodded, but fear doesn't disappear just because you give it permission to leave. They brought us into a conference room with too many chairs and not enough warmth. 3 people from legal, 1 from HR, polite faces, practice concern. They thanked my wife for her courage and for coming forward. That phrasing made my jaw tighten. Coming forward suggested choice. I wondered how many times they'd made it hard enough that people went back instead. My wife's lawyer arrived last, nodded to us, and sat down without shaking anyone's hand. The questions started carefully. Timelines. Communications. Did she feel pressured? Had there been promises? Threats. I watched my wife answer, her voice shaking at first, then steadier. She talked about the messages, the reminders, the fear of being labeled difficult. She talked about the hotel, not in detail, just enough. I could feel every word land like a stone. When they asked why she hadn't reported sooner, she said something that surprised even me. She said, because I thought I was alone. The room went quiet. Then it was my turn. I hadn't expected that. They asked when I found out what I'd seen, what I'd been told. I told them about the receipt, about the message, about the documents. I told them about the unknown number. Their faces changed at that. They asked if I'd kept the messages. I said yes. I told them I wasn't interested in protecting anyone who relied on silence to stay comfortable. After 2 hours, they asked us to step outside while they discussed next steps. We waited in the hallway. My wife leaned against the wall like she might collapse. I stood next to her, not touching, but present. She whispered that she was scared she'd ruined everything. I told her everything was already ruined. What we were doing now was deciding what came out of the ruins. When they called us back in, the tone had shifted, less scripted, more cautious. They said the company would be launching a full external investigation. They said her boss's resignation was now official. They said there would be no confidentiality requirement attached to any compensation. That last part mattered more than the money. My wife asked if her job was safe. They said yes. I didn't miss the way they avoided my eyes when they said it. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say in that moment. The weight of what we'd done hadn't fully landed yet. That came later, when the first article appeared online. No names but enough details. that people who knew the company would connect the dots. My wife read it silently, then handed me the phone. Her hands were steady. That scared me more than if they'd been shaking. That evening the calls started. Old coworkers, friends, some supportive, some curious, some asking questions that weren't theirs to ask. My wife didn't answer most of them. I fielded a few, deflecting, protecting what little privacy we had left. At one point, she asked me why I was doing that. I told her because, no matter what happened between us, I wasn't going to let the world reduce her to a headline. Later, she asked me again where we stood. I told her the truth, that I was still hurt, still angry, still unsure, but I also told her something else. I told her I'd seen a side of her this week that I hadn't seen in years, a woman willing to face consequences instead of running from them. That mattered. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it mattered. That night we talked about therapy. Not couples therapy yet. Individual. For both of us. We talked about boundaries. About what rebuilding would actually require if we chose it. Transparency. Patience. Time. She said she was willing to do all of it. I told her willingness was the starting line, not the finish. Just before bed, my phone buzzed with a final message from the unknown number. "They can't bury it now." I typed back, "Thank you." There was no response. I didn't expect one. Whoever they were, they'd done what they needed to do. So had we. As I lay in bed, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't come in the form of shouting or humiliation. It came in the form of truth, and justice hadn't been loud or satisfying in the way movies make it. It was quiet, uncomfortable, exhausting, but real. The question that remained, as sleep finally pulled me under, was whether truth would also be enough to save what was left of my marriage, or whether it would simply make the ending cleaner. Either way, I knew we were finally done lying. The weeks that followed didn't feel dramatic. That surprised me, after everything. The receipt, the lies, the investigation. I expected some kind of emotional climax. Instead, life settled into something quieter, heavier, like walking with a healed bone that still aches when the weather changes. My wife went to work every day. So did I. We exchanged schedules, not affection. We spoke honestly, but carefully, like people learning a new language neither of us had asked to study. Therapy started separately, just like we'd agreed. The first few sessions were brutal, not because of shouting or blame, but because of clarity. My therapist asked me who I was outside of my marriage. I didn't have a good answer. I'd been a husband for so long that I'd let that role swallow everything else. I realized how much of my identity had been built around stability, reliability, being the one who didn't cause problems. That realization made me understand my wife a little more, even when I didn't want to. Her therapy changed her too. Slowly, subtly. She started speaking differently. Not defensively. Not apologetically. Just directly. One night at dinner she told me she was angry. Not at me, at herself, for choosing silence over safety for so long. For confusing attention with worth. She said she was learning that being wanted isn't the same as being valued. I listened. I didn't interrupt. That was new for both of us. The company investigation expanded. Names came out. More women came forward. Some public. Some anonymous. The story grew teeth. My wife's boss was no longer a central figure. He was just one example. Watching it unfold was strange. Vindicating, yes, but also exhausting. There was no satisfaction in seeing careers unravel, just a quiet acknowledgement that harm had consequences when people stopped hiding it. One evening, about a month in, my wife asked if we could talk about us, not logistics, not therapy schedules, us. We sat on opposite ends of the couch again. Like we had so many times before, she said she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She said she understood if that never came, What she wanted to know was whether I could imagine a future where we weren't defined by this moment. I told her the truth. I said, I could imagine it, but imagination wasn't commitment. That rebuilding trust felt like standing at the bottom of a mountain without a map. I told her some days I missed her terribly, even while sitting in the same room. Other days, I felt numb. She nodded, and said she felt the same. That scared her less now than it would have before. Uncertainty, she said, was better than pretending. A few days later, I did something I hadn't planned. I went back to the storage unit alone. I unlocked it, walked in, and stood there longer this time. I picked up the photo again. The letters, the fragments of a life that never quite existed but never quite went away either. I didn't read the letters. I didn't need to. I packed everything into boxes and brought them home. That night I told my wife I'd been there. She stiffened, waiting for judgment. Instead, I told her we needed to decide what to keep and what to let go of. Together, we went through it slowly. Some things she kept, some things she threw away without hesitation. When we reached the photo, she looked at it for a long time. Then she turned it over and crossed out the words on the back. She didn't replace them with anything. She just crossed them out. That gesture mattered more than any apology she'd given me. Months passed. We stayed together, but we didn't pretend we were fine. We worked. We fought sometimes. We laughed occasionally. And those moments surprised us both. We told our children, carefully, honestly, without details that weren't theirs to carry. They reacted differently. As people do, none of them walked away that felt like grace. One night, sitting at the same kitchen table where all of this had started, my wife asked me a question I'd been expecting and dreading. She asked if I still loved her. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the hotel receipt, the lies, the fear, the courage, the truth. I told her I loved who she was becoming. I told her love wasn't something I could promise blindly anymore, but it was something I was still choosing to explore. She accepted that without tears. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't when this began. Betrayal feels like the end because it destroys the story you thought you were living. But sometimes the story you were living was already incomplete. Missing chapters. Skipped truths. What comes after isn't a sequel. It's a rewrite, and rewrites are harder, because you can't rely on fantasy anymore. I don't know how our story will end. I've stopped pretending I need to. What I know is this: when that hotel receipt hit my phone, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. I thought it was the moment everything was taken away. Now I see it differently. It was the moment silence lost its power. The moment truth, however painful, finally walked into the room and refused to leave. And if there's justice in that, it isn't revenge, it's freedom.